You may not realize that the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction, referred to as the Hague Convention, is a law in the United States, but it is. The international law intended to deal with parental child abduction is the law of the land and signatory countries that have signed it. The United States recognizes the Hague Convention as a binding domestic law. The core provision of the Hague Convention requires that in cases of parental abduction, the child must be returned to the country where the couple lived. This provision was the subject of dispute in the landmark case of Abbott versus Abbott. The case began in Chile, where Jacqueline and Timothy Abbott, a married couple, separated in 2003. The Chilean court gave custody of their young son to Jacqueline with ample visitation rights to Timothy. The court also issued what's referred to as an EXEAT order, which is an order prohibiting either parent from taking the minor child out of the country without the other parent's consent. Without telling Timothy, Jacqueline took their son and moved to Texas. Timothy located them and filed a case in federal court, asking the judge to order the boy to be returned to Chile. He claimed that the boy's removal from Chile constituted a wrongful removal under the Hague Convention. However, the Texas court denied Timothy's request. It ruled that the EXEAT order issued by the court in Chile did not grant Timothy custody rights to his child, but only access rights. Only custody rights, the court held, can result in a wrongful removal under the Hague Convention and require the court to order the child returned to Chile. Timothy appealed to the Federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The trial court also found that whether it must order the child returned to Chile depended upon whether Timothy's rights under the EXEAT order were rights of custody or rights of access under the Hague Convention. The Fifth Circuit Court noted that some district courts said yes on this issue, while some said no. But ultimately, the trial court denied Timothy's request. It reasoned that since the Chilean court awarded Jacqueline sole custody, Timothy did not get any custody rights under the order. It characterized the EXEAT order as a right to veto the child's departure from Chile, not a custody right, and thus not a basis for a court order returning the child to Chile. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear the case and resolve the different rulings in the lower courts. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court noted that the Hague Convention only gives a parent the right to have a child returned to the country he lived in if that parent has custodial rights. Access rights are not enough to trigger the provisions requiring return of the child to the country of habitual residence. Custody rights and access rights do not mean the same thing in all situations, however. In divorce cases in Arizona, custody usually refers to the responsibility for daily supervision and care of a child, while access rights generally mean the right to visitation. However, because this case involved the way those words were used in the Hague Convention, the court looked to the terms of the treaty itself. The United States Supreme Court found that the Hague Convention defines custody rights to include the right to determine a child's place of residence. It found that the EXEAT rights conveyed to Timothy gave him that right, with his wife, to jointly decide his son's country of residence. From this, the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that because the Hague Convention defines custody rights to include the right to determine the child's place of residence, Mr. Abbott's right to determine his son's country of residence through his statutory EXEAT right constituted a joint custody right. After reviewing the language in the treaty, the court discussed other sources of treaty interpretation. The court said that the U.S. Department of State regarded EXEAT rights as a right of custody, and noted this was also the interpretation given to the EXEAT rights by 6 other Hague Convention member states. This was of particular importance since uniform international interpretations of the Convention was part of the Convention's framework. The United States Supreme Court ruled that a parent, like Timothy, with an EXEAT right has a custody right and may seek a judicial order requiring the child's return to his country of habitual residence. Therefore, the court reversed the decision of the trial court and sent it back for the trial court for further consideration.